समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
The poisonous icons emerged out of stone like viral online memes today in the late Middle Ages, carved into church walls and choir stalls. Each showed Jews suckling or sometimes having sex with pigs. The theologian and anti-Semite Martin Luther described one which was at his own church in Wittenberg, using highly offensive graphic imagery. For decades now, German Jewish groups have sought to have the Wittenberg sculpture and some 24 similar works removed. German courts have declined, noting that the works are often near explanatory plaques, giving context. Luther, the author of this savagely anti-Semitic propaganda, is celebrated by statues that loom over the country. And this in a country where displays of Nazi insignia or even pro-Palestinian slogans can be punished with prison. Last week, Germany's conservative Chancellor Friedrich Merz and his social democratic allies tore up decades-old restrictions on borrowing, which will enable a massive growth in military power as well as a $545 billion infrastructure development fund. The spending will restore Germany, already Europe's largest economy and country, to its central place in the continent's security and economic growth. That ought to be a good thing. Just last week, Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk wryly noted that, and I quote, 500 million Europeans are begging 300 million Americans for protection from 140 million Russians who have been unable to overcome 50 million Ukrainians for 3 years. True. And yet, there's also this. A fifth of voters in Germany's just concluded elections voted for the neo-Nazi party Alternative for Deutschland, which wants to take the country out of the European Union. The compound noun for defense in German has been replaced in public discussions with another word, which means being good at war making, scholar Almut Roszowanski observes. The question we need to be asking is a stark one. Is a militarized strong Europe, which led the world into 2 great world wars, in fact a good instrument to maintain peace? The survival of the anti-Semitic icons in Germany's churches reminds us that what we see as Europe's liberal culture today is not the only thing that the world ought to be observing and concerned about. From the dawn of the Cold War, as Allied cargo aircraft struggled to sustain Berlin through the Soviet blockade of 1948-1949, generals in the United States had begun to consider rebuilding shattered European militaries to face the threat from communism. The result was the North Atlantic Treaty, the framework for a mutual self-defense system in Europe. Germany was not, however, initially included in this group because of worries among other European powers. This left a big-ish hole in defensive arrangements against the Soviet Union. Germany, after all, had the largest manpower and military-industrial base. Late in the 1950s, the United States Joint Chiefs of Staff declared that they were, I quote, firmly of the opinion that, from the military point of view, the appropriate and early rearming of Western Germany is of fundamental importance to the defense of Western Europe against the USSR. There was, they understood, just no other way to stop a Soviet offensive across the Elbe River. This argument, though, received firm pushback from America's political leadership. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, President Harry Truman responded, were bluntly not realistic. We certainly don't want to make the same mistake that was made after World War I, when Germany was authorized to train 100,000 soldiers, principally for maintaining order locally in Germany. Truman reflected. That 100,000 was used as the basis of training the greatest war machine that ever came forth in European history. For its part, the State Department also chided the general, saying, I quote, "It is to our advantage to delay the remilitarization of Germany in any form, at least until we have had more time to develop democratic tendencies on the part of the German people." This pushback against the generals was pretty much common sense. Nazi insurgents had continued to fight on after 1945. Historian Perry Biddlescombe's work reminds us, and there was certainly no guarantee a liberal democratic Germany would emerge anytime soon. The reintegration of former Nazis into the Federal Republic of Germany's bureaucracy had begun, but the outcomes were very, very uncertain. French and British leaders were, with good reason, deeply concerned about building up powerful German forces again. Like blows from a hammer, the crisis of the Cold War ended up forcing Europe to let Germany rearm. Even though plans for a European military controlled by European authority were drawn up by French Prime Minister René Pleven, they never materialized. Germany joined NATO in 1955 and built its new national army, the Bundeswehr. From the outset, though, there was a tension built into United States' aims. Even as it sought economically thriving and militarily robust allies in Europe, a now declassified CIA paper observes, it was reluctant to cede to its partners the right to make their own strategic decisions. The transatlantic partners soon realized that they were not on the same page all the time. In 1956, Britain's Prime Minister Anthony Eden allied with France's Guy Mollet and Israel's David Ben-Gurion to attack Egypt and occupy the newly nationalized Suez Canal. That operation was an utter disaster, historian Yagil Henkin has recorded, and firmed up American determination to keep Europe out of the affairs of former colonies. France, for its part, bitterly complained of the lack of American interest in its long and brutal counterinsurgency campaign against nationalists in Algeria. A decade later, during the Vietnam War, American insistence that the cost of warfighting be shared between the Allies irked the Europeans. The Allies could never agree on how many ground troops the Europeans ought to provide to the common NATO defense effort or how large their financial contribution should be, analyst Klaus Lares has observed. Even as the transatlantic partnership grew, larger European powers hedged their bets. The United Kingdom and France, notably, ended up developing their own nuclear weapons to make sure they could confront the Soviet Union even if the United States abandoned Europe. For many, it seems as if Trump's turning away from Europe leaves countries like Germany with no choice but to rearm. The debate isn't new, though. Former United States Defense Secretary Robert Gates, who served under President Barack Obama, warned back in 2011 that Europe was, I quote, apparently unwilling to devote the necessary resources to make the necessary changes to be serious and capable partners in their own defense. An assurance by European states to spend 2% of their GDP on defense was not delivered on by all. To create genuine European power capable of defending itself seemed completely out of reach until Germany announced recently that it was course correcting. European leaders of an older generation, as I mentioned, were far from enthusiastic in their embrace of a larger resurgent Germany. Following the fall of the Berlin Wall, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev would later reveal that both France's Francois Mitterrand and the United Kingdom's Margaret Thatcher, I quote Gorbachev, insisted that the unification of Germany should not go on, that the process should be stopped. That's because they feared what a large, powerful German bloc in Europe would eventually mean. Thatcher even risked irking her American allies with her trenchant resistance to unification. European Monetary Union, Alan Phillips has argued, provided a tool to temper the power of a reunified Germany and enmesh its fortunes with the rest of Europe. Germany emerged as the economic heart of the European fortress. Today, though, there are doubts about how durable the Europe will actually prove to be. Europe's peoples are in the middle of an intense political convulsion that has seen far-right parties rise from France to Italy and Hungary, all opposed to European federalism. Like Trump, the leaders of these parties are determined to sweep aside liberal values they believe have led to the degradation of their national cultures. The European Union, even the currency union, could conceivably be swept aside. Germany's culture, of course, isn't just about Luther, whose anti Semitism was matched, the controversial historian A.J.P. Taylor reminds us, by his untiring calls for complete deference to kings. Liberalism today has deep roots in Germany, and it is culturally among Europe's most plural nations. Yet the survival of the cult of Luther and various similar ultra nationalist tendencies elsewhere in Europe should remind us that the past does not easily give up its grip on national imaginations. A generation ago, no one would have predicted neo Nazis would once again be occupying seats in the Reichstag. The liberal European values which kept the peace after 1945 might survive the political chaos that's come with Trump world. And then again, they might not. The armies Europe is now building will then be at the vanguard of nightmares we cannot even imagine today. I'm Praveen Swami, and I'm a contributing editor to ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.